constantly fighting with the settings on your sewing machine? Does it give you a bit of anxiety to try and understand what you should change to stop the sewing machine eating your fabric? If this is you, I've got you covered. In this video, we are going further into checking out the Brother Innovis NV1800Q and how to master sewing machine adjustments like tension, stitch length, speed and pressure. Before we start though, a quick note to let you know that this video is sponsored by Brother Australia and the Innovis NV1800Q. For more information, additional sewing machine models, and to find your nearest Brother sewing machine stockist, make sure you click on the links in the description below. And in case you missed the first two videos, this is the third in a series on the Brother Innovis 1800Q, and if you'd like to catch the other two, you can click the links on the screen now or in the description below. If we take a look at the stitch length setting here, it is this number represented on your LCD screen, and when you first turn your machine on, it will generally be set to a 2.5 unless you've changed it. So 2.5 millimeter means that the stitch is 2.5 millimeters in length, and it's a really good general run-of-the-mill, middle-of-the-road stitch to work on with most woven fabrics. So if you're thinking like a cotton poplin, it's a really good length. The times that you would change it would be, you might be working with a finer fabric, so you want something a little bit smaller, and then as you work with thicker fabrics, you want to elongate it. So to change it, you push these up and down buttons. So the lowest it goes is a 0.2, and then the highest it goes is a 5 mil length. So a 5 mil length is when you would be doing something like a basting stitch. So a basting stitch is when you are just putting two pieces or more of fabric together and you just kind of want to hold it in place, but it's very easy to take this stitch out in general because it's very loose. It's a very loose stitch. So as a general rule, I will generally sew between a 2.5 and a 3, and then if I'm doing a top stitch, I will tend to go for a 4 to a 4.5 because it's not structural stitch, it is more of a decorative stitch. Like it's a top stitch is more of a look, so you're not looking for it to hold structural integrity in your piece of work. So I'm happy to go sort of that longer top stitch, particularly on bag making, because it just gives a nicer look. So one of the times that you may change this to be slightly longer than say a 3 when you're still doing general sewing work would be when you are sewing with thicker fabric. So I'm going to give you an example now. We're going to sew some vinyl and I'll show you the differences between using sort of a general size stitch length and a slightly longer one. I've got my vinyl pieces here, so it is slightly thicker than what your average fabric would be. So I'm going to show you, this is on a stitch length of 2.5, what happens. If we have a look here, we can see that our stitches are quite uniform in shape and it does hold it together. But on something like a vinyl, having a stitch close together is actually detrimental to your overall sewing. So having those stitches close together is going to create a perforated effect on your vinyl, and it's not going to hold up very well for longevity in your project. So I've made bags before when I was first starting. I used a short stitch length and they've essentially ripped out, like the straps have ripped because it was like a perforation, and over time with wear and tear and just general weight and torque on the stitches, it's fallen apart. So I will generally lengthen my stitch. So I'll grab another piece. So now I've increased my stitch length to a 3.5 and we're going to stitch. And this gives a better sew than what your 2.5 is. So it's probably a little bit tricky to see, but that 3.5 is just that little bit longer than the 2.5, and it's going to give you structurally more soundness to your bag. The other thing is, when you've got thicker fabrics, it's using the same amount of thread to go down and up. So your 2.5 mil stitch length may not actually be 2.5 mil. It might be more around that 2 mil because it's got more fabric to go down and come back up. So it's important to get your stitch length right, because if you don't, and you end up having something too small, it can end up leading to skipped stitches because there's not enough thread going down to catch that bobbin thread as it's coming back up. So if it doesn't pick up the bobbin thread down here, it can lead to skip stitches, which is another reason why you should be checking your needles regularly, because if you do not have a sharp needle, then you also risk having skip stitches because it's not piercing the fabric quick enough, or at the expected time. The timing can be out, meaning that it's again missing this bobbin thread down the bottom here. We can see here with these stitch lengths why it makes a difference to adjust the stitch length when you've got thickness in fabric. So here I've just got some cotton poplin. It's a stitch length of 3. I'll see if I can come in a little bit in a minute. And this is 2 layers of vinyl, so obviously extremely different thicknesses, with a stitch length the same length of 3. So if we compare these, you can actually see, and I know I will show it even closer, but the stitch length of 3 on the cotton poplin, which is the thinner, is actually longer than the vinyl, and that's purely because it has more fabric to get through. So if I sort of line them up, you can see the start of the stitch and the end of the stitch. The stitches on the vinyl are shorter. Same stitch lengths, exact same settings, but that just shows you why it's important to lengthen your stitch length when you're using thicker fabrics, so that you've got more fabric, or more thread I should say, to go down through the fabric and come back up and form the stitch without getting skip stitches of not having enough fabric to go through, pick up that bobbin thread and come back on top. I will be releasing a series of videos on why it's important to use the correct needles in a future video, so make sure you are subscribed so you can get that notification once it goes live. But if you're ever unsure as well, have a look in your manual. The Innovis has a great little guide here on different fabric types and what size needle and what type of needle. So if you're ever unsure, you can always grab your manual out, and it's got some really great tips in there as well. Next, we're going to look at tension. So what is tension in sewing? Tension is the amount of pressure your machine uses to pull the thread while forming a stitch, and it affects how tightly or loosely the stitches are held in the fabric. So why is it that tension matters? Incorrect tension can lead to looping or loose stitches, puckered seams, thread breaking, or visible top thread on the underside or bobbin thread on top. Some of the instances when you might need to adjust your tension are you may have changed thread types or weights, so thicker or stretchier threads behave differently than standard polyester. You may have changed fabric types, so lightweight fabrics may need less tension, whereas heavier or thicker fabrics may need more. If you're seeing loops or puckering, adjusting the tension is usually one of the first things to check, or if you're using specialty techniques, something like top stitching or shirring, you may need to tweak those tension settings just a little bit. The best way to test it is to do a stitch test on a scrap of fabric, and it's always a good idea to test on the same fabric you'll be sewing with. And what you'll be looking at is sort of how that stitch is formed from the top and bottom. If the top thread is visible underneath, then the tension may be too loose. And if the bobbin thread is visible on top, then the tension might be too tight. One of the first things you can also do is to rethread your machine, just to make sure that your thread is sitting in those tension discs, getting the tension it needs from your machine. It's always good to make small adjustments, and then you can test it again. So just testing one number at a time so you can start to understand how tension really works. When I'm talking about flossing the tension discs, what I mean is that in behind here are tension discs, and they are what the thread sits between, and it's what controls the tension. So this button here will send information to the tension discs of how tight or how loose to hold the thread. So the best way to know if your thread is within the tension disc, what you can do is rethread. Always make sure that your presser foot is up, because if it is down, those tension discs are closed. So you're not going to be able to get your thread into the tension disc. So we're going to make sure our presser foot is up. We're just going to re-thread. And even without me, having to thread the whole machine, I can freely pull my thread. So that's good. If I put my needle down, I'm pulling and it's not doing much up here. So I know that that thread is now in the tension discs. It's a bit easier to do something on an overlocker or to test the tension discs on an overlocker or a serger, but on a sewing machine you can check when you can't see them behind here, if once your presser foot is down, if it's giving a bit of tension as it is, it should be in that tension disc. One of the other handy features of the Innovis is the speed control. So you've got 3 sort of steps here. It can be used with or without the foot pedal. I might actually take the foot pedal out to demonstrate this one. Sometimes you just need to reset the machine. You take the foot pedal out. So I've got some fabric here and I'm going to start really slow. So this shows you the lowest speed, then we can go up and full speed. So you can use any combination of speed and go at the pace that you like. But one of the things that I really like about the speed is that it gives you a lot more control over what you're doing. And let me just tell you, there are no prizes for going the quickest. And nobody knows how long something took you to sew. So you're not wearing a big sign on your back saying, this took me 20 hours or this took me, 10 minutes. So go really slow. It's how you get a really beautiful top stitching. But one of the other things that I do actually want to show you is that as a standard, the Innovis comes with the 1/4 inch quilt piecing foot, which you can use for top stitching. And it's great because it's got this guide along here, so you can pop that in your seam if you want to get 1/4 inch away from your seam, and it gives you just that really clean top stitch look. So I'll demonstrate it and show you, but it's such a great foot for when you want really precise top stitching. So it just fits with your normal shank or your normal piecing. It does have this straight stitch hole here, so you can't move your foot side to side, so you can't do like zigzagging or anything with this stitch. It is a straight stitch only, but you can then, if we want to, we're going to pretend that this stitching line is a seam, and then I'm going to pop my foot down, just make sure I'm lined up on it. And then as I sew, I'm going to use my guide to make sure that I'm getting a really straight, even top stitch. And like I said, go as fast or as slow as you need to. I often find with top stitching, slower the better, because it gives you so much more control over what you're doing. So if we finish this one off, if we look at that, that's pretty even between. So that's using our 1/4 inch foot. We pretended that was a seam, and if that was a seam and I'd top stitch that, I'd be pretty happy with that. So you can use it to just, choose where you want, and then you get really beautiful top stitching. If you want to get an 1/8 of an inch top stitch, you can actually use this measurement here. So what you would do, let me pop this down, is instead of measuring from the 1/4 inch side, you are going to measure from this side. So if we start to gently sew, so you could have that lined up with your seam, and if we have that lined up there, just do a little bit. We now have that 1/8 of an inch, which is really advantageous when you're doing top stitching on some garments as well. The last thing we're going to look at in this video is the presser foot pressure. So when we're looking at presser foot pressure, what you can do is go into your menu and you can scroll down to here. And this is your presser foot pressure. So the higher the number, the more pressure you're going to have from the foot, and the lower the pressure, the less pressure you're going to have. Some of the reasons that you may actually change your presser foot pressure is if you're doing something like free motion quilting and you wanted to sort of very easily glide that fabric along, or you might have a particularly light fabric, so you want to make sure that you're not putting too much pressure from the top foot and have it go down into the feed dogs. So a general presser foot pressure is 3. You should generally never really need to change that, but if you need to, you know where to do it. And then one of the things that I do love about the Innovis is that it has this automatic fabric sensor system. So this is when the thickness of the fabric is automatically detected and the presser foot pressure is automatically adjusted with an internal sensor by sewing. So this is just to really ensure that your fabric is fed smoothly, and the fabric sensor system works continuously while sewing. It's really useful for sewing over thick seams or quilting, but what I really love is that it comes with that, so you can turn it off and on if you want to, but as a general rule I keep mine on because I find it a really helpful addition to my general sewing. Hopefully that's cleared up a little of your confusion on how to adjust some of the more important sewing machine basic settings that you may come up against when you're sewing and learning to sew. The Innov-is NV1800Q is actually such a great sewing machine for beginners, as I've found there is very little adjusting that you even have to do. It's quite an intuitive and easy to use machine with a number of features built in that automatically compensate for many of the techniques and fabrics you would likely to be using as a beginner. It has the depth of features to be able to get quite a lot of customization as well, without the giant price tag of some of the more high-end machines. As I mentioned earlier, this is the 3rd video in the series about the Brother Innov-is NV1800Q, so I encourage you to go and check out the others in the series which are listed on screen now.